Go.
Good evening. My name is Bilal Suni Ali, and I want to talk with y'all today about my recovery from a very serious ailment I had. My kidneys were infected. I had a stroke probably around the 11th the 11th month of 2012. So November 2012, toward the latter part of the month, I had a minor stroke, in which my wife had to really tell me about it, because what I remember happening is that I was sitting in a restaurant where I was working, where I was performing. It was in the mid-afternoon, and I had planned to perform there later on that night. I was talking with the restaurant owner, and the next thing I know, I began feeling I felt nauseous in my stomach, and the nauseous overcame me. It became overwhelming, to the point where I blanked out. But as it was becoming was overwhelming, and as I was losing consciousness, I began to have the sensation, the feeling that I was in the presence of Allah, and I was thanking Him. I was being thankful for having lived a life that I felt very thankful for having been able to enjoy such a life in which I had been able to serve, been able to serve humanity, and particularly to serve my people in their struggle for liberation. And then I had been doing it as a musician in these last few years, in these latter years. I've been doing it as a musician, and I was, like I said, I was in the restaurant to perform some music, and I was overwhelmed with this nausea, and then presented with this feeling as if my life was over, and that I was being thankful for it. And just about at that time, I don't remember anybody saying that in specific, but it was the presence that I was in the being of imparted to me that my life wasn't over, and that I had much more to do. And just about that time, as that part of the sequence was taking place, I began to hear my wife call me, and she was calling me, and when I regained consciousness, she was telling me that I had fell off the chair, that while I was talking to the restaurant owner, she was listening from a distance, and she didn't hear me say anything for a while. He had asked me a question, and I didn't answer the question. She turned to look to see why I didn't answer the question, and I was rocking back and forth in my chair, and subsequently fell over on the floor. And I was laying on the floor, my tongue was sticking out of my mouth, my eyes were rolling in my head, and as she was calling me, I wasn't responding. I was in another realm, I was on another plane. And like I said, I thought this life was over, and I was being thankful for it, but I am thankful that it wasn't over, and that I have more to do. But right at that moment, I was wondering, why was she calling me? Because I was really in a different place. And I was wondering, why was she calling me, and why was she calling me back to this realm? I really wanted to say something to her about that, about disturbing me. But when I got back into this realm, which she had called me back to, you know, I realized that I was back in this realm, and as I had been told, I had more purposeful things to do, and yet some more time to spend on this plane in this realm. And shortly after that episode in which I had the mild stroke, I began to develop swelling in my ankles and swelling in my knees, and that went on for a few weeks. And although it was happening, I disregarded it. I didn't take it as something serious. Eventually, I kept going back. I went to the sea. I was living in Belize at the time, and I would go soak in the ocean, soak in the Caribbean Sea, and the swelling would go down, and I'd have that mobility back in my arms and in my knees and in my ankle area. But it was constantly recurring to the point where some mornings I would get up, it would be hard to get up and walk. Eventually I went to a doctor, a medical doctor, to see if he could tell me what the problem was. They took samples. What happened, they said that they would take samples. I was living in Punta Gorda, which is in the southern part of Belize. He said they wouldn't be able to get samples. They wouldn't be able to get an answer. This was like on a Wednesday. Yeah, it was on a Wednesday. And they said they wouldn't be able to get an answer until Monday. So my wife was in communication with my daughter, who works in a hospital, works for a doctor's office. She manages a doctor's office here in Atlanta, Dr. Haida Sayinka. And Dr. Sayinka's son, who is also a Dr. Sayinka, is the intake doctor at the emergency room at, I'm forgetting the name of the hospital right now, but so they arranged to have me come in, to fly up to Atlanta and to go straight in the hospital and have some tests done. But even there, they weren't able to tell me what the infection was, what type of infection was, or the degree of seriousness of the infection. I even saw an infection specialist. They weren't able to tell me anything, but then a nephrologist, I believe it's called, a doctor who's in charge of kidneys in specific, told me that my kidneys were not functioning properly, that I was losing protein, that I was losing sodium, and I was losing potassium, and I was losing it at a very rapid rate, and that they were suggesting that I might need dialysis. But he suggested that first that a biopsy be done, that they take a specimen of my kidneys and test that to see if it was cancerous. I had any cancer cells in my kidneys. But before they would do the biopsy, the nephrologist told me that I had to wait for 7 days because I had been taking a blood thinner. And I had been complaining about them giving me blood thinner and saying that I didn't need it. But when they told me that taking the blood thinner made them delay in taking a biopsy, I was glad. I just realized that it was the cutter of Allah and Allah's mercy that by some mistake I was being given blood thinner. But by Allah's will, it was not a mistake by Allah's will, because the blood thinner is what prevented them from doing a biopsy on my kidneys. Most of the everyone else that I knew at that time who had a biopsy done on their kidneys has since passed on. Because biopsy is a procedure where they take a piece of your organ and they pull it back out and take it to a lab. In that process, sometimes sometimes when there's cancer, the cancer will spread. So what happens after 2 days of waiting on this 7-day period that would have to lapse of me not taking a blood thinner, where so that they would do the biopsy, this same nephrologist said that my kidneys were in failure and that I needed to go on dialysis. He said that on one day, and the following day he came back and said that my kidneys were much worse and that I needed to go on dialysis that day, and that they would have to, the people from the lab would have to come and prep me for it. So it would be my decision, but I would have to make up my mind and voice my decision within 90 minutes. It was about 10:30, and he said that it was a Friday. He was going home. The lab people get off early on Friday, so that he would have to tell them so that they could begin prepping me soon after 12 o'clock. And at that point, I had already been in touch. I had been in touch with a brother of mine who studies herbology up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And he had told me that I should get some dandelion root and some milk thistle. And I had my niece, who works at a health food store, get those items for me. And I had them with me in the hospital. So although they told me not to take anything, I began taking the dandelion root and the milk thistle. As soon as he told me that they were suggesting that I go on dialysis in a few hours. So, being taken that, the nurse came back to get my answer, which they expected me to say, yeah, go ahead and prep me for dialysis. But the nurse found me eating the dandelion root, and I told the nurse that was my answer, that I was gonna do what I thought was best, based on a natural doctor, natural medicine telling me, and not one of these chemical. Yeah, they're experimentalists. They just do things. They had said that the state of Georgia would pay for everything, so they were about to go through a gamut of things that were unnecessary, just for the sake of the money, or just for the sake of the research and the money that they would get based on the research that they was doing. So the same nephrologist came back the next day and told me that for some reason that my kidneys had improved, that they weren't losing as much sodium or potassium or protein as they had been losing. And each day for the next 3 days, they told me that it was better and better. They never said my kidneys were all right, but they told me my kidneys was getting better. I attributed it to the herbs that had been prescribed for me, and the fact that I was taking those herbs. And I wanted to get out of the hospital, so it came about 3 days later that I actually left the hospital. It was actually freezing cold in the hospital. Besides them wanting to do this way out procedures with me, the hospital itself was freezing. It wasn't healthy for a person in their perfect health to be in there. And one of the doctors even told me privately and very quietly that there was something wrong with the heating system in the hospital, but they hadn't announced it to the patients. So, and that further made me want to get out of there, because here they were treating people for illnesses, and they had something wrong with their heating system, which would lead, which would not help the situation that anybody was in. It wasn't even healthy for themselves, who were in somewhat good health. And so when about 7 days after they had prescribed the dialysis, I left the hospital on my own. They wanted me to sign something. I told them I wasn't signing anything. I didn't sign anything to get in there, and I wasn't going to sign anything to get out. I was just going to leave. So I left, and I came under the care of a very good friend of mine, Dr. Kokai Patterson, up in Washington, D.C., who was a doctor of acupuncture and natural medicine. And when he began to talk to me about things about my condition and review some of the patterns that I spoke of in terms of my ankle swelling and having lack of mobility when I'd wake up in the morning, I began to realize that my practice of Tai Chi had been enough to indicate to me that I had a serious kidney ailment, but I for some reason didn't pay attention to it. I didn't connect it, even though I had experience with other people and had connected it for other people. Something up there. I had connected it for other people, but when it came to myself, like I know a lot of people say they're their own worst patient, and I could apply that to myself at that point, because there was definitely enough disruption with my kidneys and with my legs for me to, at that point, talk to my wife, who was a doctor of acupuncture, about what was ailing me. So once I had realized it already, but under his care and during discussion with him, I fully realized it and realized that I needed to take much better care of myself. And so I stayed under his care. He told me that it would take a few years to get back. My kidneys were in such condition that it would take a few years. I went to, at the time that I was under Dr. Kokai's care, I went to a herbalist in Atlanta by the name of Dr. Ellen.